I wrote Blood Lesson on Gems and the book was better. Isn't that what we always say when we see a film based on a book or a book series that completely misses the point of the book or book series? That the book was better. The book is always better because that's the original medium. That's the way the story was meant to be told. So the book has to be better. But what about The Third Man? What about Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, and Star Wars, The Clone Wars, and pretty much all of the Star Wars? What about like Beckham and Billy Elliot? What about books based on films? Are they better? I noticed when trying to figure out if the book is always better was how difficult it was to actually find these books at my local library. And to quote my librarian when I asked why they don't have so many of these books, is that they don't have such a high literary quality. Yeah, I kind of found this out when reading the books. I mean, I'm not saying all of them are badly written. Both The Third Man and The Phantom Menace was written okay. There is one explanation. It could be several things, but there is one thing that comes to mind with why this is, and it's money. Producing a film costs money. Even if it's not a high budget film, it still costs a lot of money. And you're not going to invest all that money unless you think you're going to get a profit, unless you think you're going to get that money back. And regarding that, it therefore makes sense that if you're going to invest money in producing a film, you want to produce a film that's going to get your money back. And contrast this to books. Books are really cheap to produce. It can't compare to what even low budget films. And therefore it isn't that strange that you sort of get that these difference in qualities in adapting a film based on a book contra adapting a book based on a film. What I noticed was that the same way that films aren't always true to their book they're adapting, the books aren't necessarily that true to the films that they're adapting. And the best example I have was when I read The Phantom Menace, where Terry Brooks has used one of the positive things when regarding adaptations, which is recognizing the sin of the father or mother and trying to fix it. So in this book, we, for example, are introduced to Anakin much sooner, and we get to know more of his personality before he's sort of whisked away. And considering the book series is about Anakin, that makes sense. It makes it a better story than the film. But this is easily done because the film is so generally disliked. And because books are cheap to produce, trying something like this isn't that much of a risk. Now, because films cost so much money, it is a risk involved when adapting it. And you're not going to make a film on a book or a book series that people don't like. I mean, even books like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey were made into films because they had a huge fan base. And the reality is that when you love something, either it's a book or a film or anything like that, you're not going to be that aware or willing to admit, or might even love it because of its faults. And this is quite interesting regarding the film version of 50 Shades of Grey. Now, don't get me wrong, it did well. It absolutely did well. And of course, the people who didn't like the book series in general, didn't like the film, we're not surprised about that. But what was interesting was how divided the fans of the book and book series was when they watched the film. Because what the filmmakers did was trying to find some of the faults of the book series and fix them. And while some of the fans liked what they did, some of the fans didn't. They wanted Anastasia to have no personality. They wanted there to be a flimsy plot because the book and book series was about fantasy. And when the filmmakers tried to make this a proper story, they took away the viewers' or consumers' ability to fantasize. That's the risk that you have when you, as a filmmaker, are adapting something because it costs so much money. Nobody is going to complain about The Phantom Menace, and even if you're going to complain about The Phantom Menace, it's not the risk because it's so cheap to make. I really got to see some of the positive story elements that each medium actually have, and I thought, and that was kind of interesting. I, for example, saw how in a book about sports, where you have sport montages, is a good story element in a film, but becomes choppy when you're going to write it down. And I noticed you have a generally higher quality, as I've already talked about before, regarding films than necessarily the books. But I also noticed something about the way books can tell a story. And one of the things I noticed was how easy it is for books to convey information that is only meant to be given to the consumer, either the viewer or the reader, than in a film. Now, I'm going to read just two quotes to exemplify that. And one is from The Phantom Menace. Now, after they've crash landed on Tatooine, and Padme is saying to Qui-Gon that she wants to join him on Tatooine, and in the film, he's just, okay, come on, it will go. And you don't really understand it, and it's okay. We need to move the plot forward, apparently. And this is what he wrote in the book. Then he looked at Padme again, saw strength in her eyes, and changed his mind. She might be useful. Traveling with a girl that might suggest a family in transit and present a less aggressive look. So Qui-Gon actually has a motivation for what he does. And he's not that easily to manipulate as the film suggests. And from The Third Man, you have a subplot. Okay, The Third Man is about a writer called Martins, but who writes westerns under the name of Dexter. And he travels to Vienna and finds that his friend is dead, and he wants to solve his friend's murder. Now, he doesn't have any money, And the subplot in this film is based on how he is confused with another author, also called Dexter, and fans of this other author gives him money so he can stay in exchange for getting literary lectures. This is never explained in the film. So when you get scenes based on the subplot, I had no idea what was going on because this information is never revealed. The novel explains this. He told me that Crabbin was at a complete loss for words. Martins couldn't understand why, because he had never read the works of his great contemporary, Benjamin Dexter. He hadn't even heard of him. I'm a great admirer of Dexter, so that I could understand Crabbin's bewilderment. Dexter had been ranked as a stylist with Henry James, but has a wider feminine streak than his master. Indeed, his enemies have sometimes described him as subtle, complex, wearing style as old maidenish. For a man still just on the right side of 50, his passionate interest in embroidery and his habit of calming a not very temperless mind with tatting, a trait beloved by his disciples, certainly to others seem a little affected. Now, knowing what kind of writer Benjamin Dexter is, that there is a writer like Benjamin Dexter, explains what happens next with the scenes, with how confused the fans of Benjamin Dexter are when they meet this more masculine Western writer. And there are ways you can convey information to the audience in films that you don't convey between the characters. You can have voiceovers, you can have flashbacks, but these techniques takes away from the realistic storytelling that both The Phantom Menace and The Third Man was striving for. They didn't want voiceovers, they didn't want flashbacks, because that took away from the way they wanted to tell the story, and therefore this information was lost, and it was easier to convey in book form. So, as I said, Roland Martins wants to solve his friend's murder. And he has a scene where he's sitting with a policeman and talking about him and his friend and their childhood. And it's a brilliant, wonderful scene in the film. The film is a masterpiece, no means by that. But when I read the book, I suddenly got what was meant between the lines. Because what I could in the book that you don't really do when watching a film is go back and reread certain parts. And you can go back and by rereading it, get the whole picture more easily. Unless you consciously know that you've missed a line, you don't really go back and rewatch a scene in the middle of watching a film. You can watch a film a second or a third time, and very often you then get all these light bulbs and say, oh, I get it now, because you get more of the information and more of the picture. But the film has an aid in the sense that it can use visual pictures to convey what they're trying to talk about, what they're trying to show. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm going back to my original statement then. Is the book always better? Leave your comments down below. I really want to know what you think. And remember, it's better to be a witty fool than a foolish wit.